This is My Taste is Better Than Yours, the manga podcast where Guardian Enzo and I, Samu, discuss some of our favourite series and figure out, is my taste better than yours?
Hello again, everyone. It's Guardian Enzo coming to you live on tape from beautiful Kyoto, Japan. And joining me, as always, for this episode of My Taste is Better Than Yours, it's Samu from London. How are you doing, Samu?
Hello there, I'm doing good. It's a lovely afternoon here in sunny London for once, and yeah, I'm ready to jump into a series from my favourite magazine. Yeah, we're going into like my specialty territory now, which I love.
Yeah, we're going to go into Shonen Jump mode for a little bit here on the show. And in that area, that's definitely Samu's home turf. He's the one who's reading the magazine cover to cover every week. I think he's as up to date on what's going on with Weekly Shonen Jump as anyone out there, pretty much. But we're going to focus on a couple of series in the next couple of episodes that we're both reading and we're both up to date on. And the first of them is the Elusive Samurai, Nige Jouzu no Wakagami. And we've done a lot of our earlier episodes up to this point have been along the my favorite, your favorite kind of range. My taste is better than yours, as it were. With this one, we're in a series where it's an interesting series that has a lot of interesting things about it. It's not one either one of us would say is in love with. I think that's fair to say. I think it's a series that I really like, but it's not a series that either one of us considers a masterpiece or anything. But it's an important series in Shonen Jump by a mangaka who's had a lot of success, and it's going to be an anime quite soon, actually, in the summer season. In fact, it's going to be an anime coming from CloverWorks. So there's a lot to talk about with the Elusive Samurai. The author, of course, in question is Matsui Yuusei, and he is going to be most known to most of our viewers as the writer of Assassination Classroom, Ass Class, as it is often called, which was it was not his first series. He'd also done a series called Neuro Supernatural Detective, which was successful, but not successful on the level of Ass Class by any stretch of the imagination. So it's not like this guy was coming in riding the wave of a monster kaiju hit and then sold a million volumes. This thing just connected, and we could do a whole show on why Assassination Classroom connected as well as it did, and we've had that conversation before, actually. But the topic of discussion here is Nige Jouzu. It's the Elusive Samurai, which is a series about it's set in that hotbed of manga settings, the 14th century, the Kamakura period, Kamakura and Muromachi period, as it's referred to officially, and which are not, even in the context of history being a topic for manga and anime, those are not eras that are widely represented by any stretch of the imagination. The Warring States era, the Sengoku period, when you get Oda, Hideyoshi, and the advent of the Tokugawa shogunate to death, especially Oda, of course. The Heian era, pretty well represented, but Muromachi and previous to that, the Kamakura period, not so much so. And this during something called the Kenmu Restoration, and basically the main character here is Hojo Tokuyuki, who was the young scion of the ruling at the time Hojo clan. He was 8 years old at the time they were overthrown by the Ashikaga clan and betrayed, basically, and went on the run. And the spin that Yuusei Matsui puts on this is that Takayuki, or excuse me, Tokiyuki is really, really good at running away. That's basically what the title means, the elusive samurai. If you translate it a little more literally, it's like it's the youngster who's really good at running away, and that's basically the gist. Is that he was great at hide and seek when he was a pampered young lord. Now he has to put that to use as a means of survival, as everyone else in his family is being hunted down and destroyed by the Ashikaga. Uh, so I want to do something slightly different than how we do in a little format, but Samu, give me like your 30 to 60 second, not getting into so much your opinion on it, but just what's your broad capsulated take on this series? How do you describe it? What is the Elusive Samurai to you?
Okay. Elusive Samurai to me is Matsui at his like most unrestricted. I think it is worth noting this is his third series in the magazine, and he's a rare case where he's had no failures, no cancellations. Both of them have been hits that have come before to different levels with Neural Supernatural Detective and the obvious Assassination Classroom. And Elusive Samurai, you could also, I think, classify it as like a soft hit, kind of. So yeah, he's had this track record, and I think he's allowed himself to do exactly what he wants. It seems to me when I read Alyssa Samurai, it's like he's focusing on this special interest of this very particular time period in Japanese history, and he's just going like balls to the walls with all these quirks that I think define who he is as a storyteller that were all present in his previous series, but it seems to me like they're all just like amped up to the next level, which I think includes his art style. Which, like, going to, my general opinion is, as you said, neither of us particularly love this series, but I think you like it even more than I do. I'm quite critical of it, and often reading it week to week along with the rest of the magazine. Sometimes I do feel like I have to push through List of Samurai, and the art style, the way he tells his stories just doesn't gel with me. I think I've come to that point where his humor and everything else just maybe isn't for me. And yeah, I think that's why I think it is because Elusive Samurai in particular feels so self-indulgent.
Yeah, I self that. Yeah, exactly, self indulgent, and good on him in the sense that he never would have been able probably to get this published before he had two huge hits. Well, Neuro was not a huge hit, but it was a big enough hit to get him Assassination Classroom, and that was undeniably a huge hit. So he earned the right to be self indulgent with a couple of series that delivered the goods commercially for Shueisha. That's the bottom line. So as you say, the artwork, the paneling, um, I think it's Assassination Classroom on steroids. I mean, I'm a big fan of Matsui's art, especially this character art. I think he has a particular skill at drawing beautiful characters. And one of the things I think that makes this series interesting is it's he's drawing really beautiful people who manage to stay beautiful in very ugly situations. That's one contrast. And he's drawing very comedic, a lot of comedy driven stuff in very grim situations full of death and dismemberment and beheadings. And would I call Elusive Samurai a comedy? I don't know that I would go so far as to say this is a comedy, but I would say that a lot of the moments that stand out from it are comedic moments. In fact, I think my favorite moment in the whole series is a panel where Tokiyuki is thinking back on all his experiences and he's reflecting back on all the weird stuff that's happened to him, and he says, "Oh my god, all my memories are of weirdos." And I think that kind of sums up, I think that almost in a way is Matsui holding up a mirror to himself as a writer. He loves weird stuff, and that contrast between the really zany comedy and then some very dark and serious subject matter is another interesting is another interesting dichotomy that you see in this, along with the art style too. So let me just say for the record that I have not read Neuro actually. So I don't know much about that series. Maybe you can give us a little bit of background on that, but I certainly know Assassination Classroom start to finish. I enjoyed it, manga and anime, but for me, now I'm in the minority on this. I think the Elusive Samurai is the better series. I think it's more interesting visually. I think it takes more chances. I think it has a more interesting premise. Um, I don't think he succeeds in everything he sets out to do with this series, but I do think that it succeeds at his trademark meta comedic moments with a lot of like anachronous modern jokes thrown in, mixed in. He did this in S Class too, but because that was a modern series, a modern setting, it's not quite so stark. How do you feel he fares with the whole meta modern in the Muromachi Kamakura period thing? How do you think he pulls that off?
Yeah, I'll be honest. I don't really like it that much. I think it's not super successful, and there aren't many times where I enjoyed what is clearly something that he loves to include in the series. All those like meta aspects and the modern references that intentionally clash with the like historical place, the historical nature of the series. I don't. I For me, it takes away from the setting itself, which clearly seems to have done a lot of research on, but it just feels super jarring in a way that I didn't really notice with his previous series, particularly Assassination Classroom, which maybe because that and its that series and its premise and its like principal character are so over the top already that like his humor just fits like a glove. Whereas I feel like there is a clash with what he does here in Alexa Samurai, which doesn't seem as natural or doesn't flow as well. I like it more and I get more engrossed with the series when it gets to those more dramatic elements. And yeah, he's not super committed to like sticking with that as much as I would like him to. And also, I think to give Elusive Samurai credit as well, where the humor maybe doesn't land as much as it did with his other series, like Assassination Classroom, I do think that his art style, one that I've already said, is just not for me and I don't really love it. I do think it actually fits really appropriately with Elusive Samurai. I think it channels that sort of ancient Japanese painting art style with his flat perspectives, and
Yes, I agree with that.
that I think mirrors the time period in a way which just feels really appropriate. Even if still I don't love it, I generally find that the characters either are like expressionless in what they're saying or over the top intentionally to the point where I can't even take what they're saying seriously. Though then you've also got like his color pages and his volume covers, which are all like really beautiful. And yeah, there's another aspect where I'm like, oh, I just wish the series looked more like that all the time.
No, it's interesting in the
But
context of my so-called artist journey, especially which is about a classically trained artist who becomes a mangaka, which is what you want to do all along. I would not be surprised if Matsui was an artist by training because he draws manga like an artist would draw it, if you know what I mean. It is like you say, like he's drawing a series of paintings. You don't see as much depth. You don't see as much three dimensional effect. He is drawing in a sense flat. He's drawing flat paintings and stringing them together in a story. Now that works for me. It doesn't work for you, and I think, as you say, I think that comes down to a difference in what your personal tastes are. And I think, in general, I would say Elusive Samurai is more style than substance as a series. And I think that's the reason why I like it better than you, because in a series that's more style over substance, if you like the style, you're fine with that. And if you don't like the style, you're not. And I think that's really, I think, yeah, I think he leads with style in the series. I'm interested to hear you say, go ahead.
I think it's such a good point that you make about the style and substance. This is a series where the style is so baked into the narrative and what's happening that it's hard to separate them. And I think sometimes it's easy then to conflate the quality of the writing with the presentation in a way that is similar, I think, to one of my favorite all-time series, which is Bleach by Tite Kubo, and that is a series that for so
Mhm.
long, even though it's I hold it dear in my heart, I often feel like I have to give like an asterisk and explain to people, oh no, this isn't representative of my full taste, and actually I do like things that are different. And yeah, because there are a lot of critiques that people have for Bleach. The Some of them are fair, and I think a lot of them are not. But I think that comes down to the style being the substance of the series. And if you appreciate and can read into what Tite Kubo is doing with the visual presentation of the narrative that isn't always there in the text, which I think is intentional and allows you to enjoy what he puts in through artwork and through paneling and how he shows and not it doesn't tell. Yeah, that's just one example of for me done very successfully. Whereas with Matsui, I just fall in the camp of the style isn't for me. Though in general, I would say as the years have gone on and as I've experienced more stories, whether they be manga or movies or anything, generally I do tend to appreciate more when a artist or author or like a director has a distinct style, has a flair to them that defines who they are as a storyteller and makes their work identifiable. I think that is, I think I value that a lot.
Yeah, and Bleach is one that I'm kind of in the opposite situation. It doesn't really, it's never really clicked with me. It never really does anything for me, and as you say, probably for much the same reason. If you've watched a couple of our episodes, you know by now that we structure these manga discussions in first of a non-spoilery section and then a spoilery section. So I want to ask Samu his sort of his philosophical take on this. When you're talking about a series that's based on historical events, is it a spoiler discussion when you talk about what really happened in the historical situation? What do you think?
Yeah, I think for this particular series, it is a spoiler to
Okay.
discuss what happens historically. Maybe because this isn't a time period in Japanese history that Western viewers I think are really
Hmm.
clued up on. I know I wasn't, though I'll admit I did look up Tokiyuki's name quickly into reading the series and effectively spoiled myself for when he dies because spoiler, he was a real person and he did die. And you can kind of forecast and like maybe put together what you think happens in the series between or up until that point because Matsui actually includes the years in each of the chapters. And yeah, so you can kind of keep that in mind as you're reading it. So I think knowing that changes people's perception of how long they think the series is going to be, what type of series it is going to be, even. Yeah.
Okay. Fair enough. Now, I will say the characters in this.
Though I have a question for you, Enzo. Did you
Sure.
know what happened as well, or like certain fates of the characters going into the
Oh,
series?
I knew before the series. I knew before the series ever started what the major. Because when I lived in Tokyo, Kamakura was I couldn't go to Kyoto every weekend. So I mean, when I wanted a big dose of Japanese history, I would go to Kamakura, and so I learned the whole Kamakura era pretty well. So there was, I had to, I basically when this whole series started, I went back and kind of had to like refresh myself on a few details, but I wasn't going to be caught off guard by any of the major events in the story because I already knew it. If I hadn't known it, though, I probably would not have gone and looked it up because I would have rather been surprised, to be honest with you. Even though I know I could go in and learn the history of it, I probably wouldn't have if I didn't already know. Which I guess, in a sense, is answering my own question, at least to how I would answer it. And I will say too, I do, style over substance. There is some substance here. I personally think Tokiyuki is an excellent protagonist. I really like him. I think he's a very interesting character with an interesting story. I think the spin on him is really an interesting take on a character in his situation, and I think he's pretty realistically childish and childlike both, and they're two different things, but still a very noble person in a way a child his age can be. So I think one could argue, well, I don't even think it's an argument that he's much more so than any other character in the series. Although there is one other character in the first sort of major arc of the series, it's pretty close. But he's not all the characters are by any means on his level. But I do think he's a great character, so I will say that. Now, I want to ask. Let's talk a little bit before we get into the spoilery stuff and get out our history book. Um, you know, Assassination Classroom was a huge hit. That's what allowed Elusive Samurai to exist in its current form. The first volume certainly didn't sell a million, but the general trend in the sales of manga volumes has been steadily downward. And they still do fine, but they don't do big sales. And I think a lot of that surely is because Ass Class fans realized that this wasn't another in the same vein. And, they didn't love Matsui's style enough to stick with it. So it may get an anime bump, but it's probably not going to get a big enough anime bump to really make a huge difference. So I want to ask you this question, Samu, is so if you're in his situation, if you're very successful, you've had really this is a hit for most mangaka in most publications. If this weren't Weekly Shonen Jump and a guy who had a monster hit, most people would call this series a modest hit. So you've had 3 hit series, but the sales are trending down. But he's probably, because he is who he is and because the sales are still decent, he can probably keep writing this thing for realistically as long as he probably wants to. Should he concern himself with the fact that it's trending downward in sales and isn't doing the sales that his previous series did? Or should he just keep doing what he's doing and not concern himself with that? Just setting aside your own personal feelings on the artistic merit of the series, what do you think? How do you think he should approach that? And I'll spoiler it by saying, if it's selling enough to continue to get WSJ behind it, and he still feels he has more story to tell, he should keep selling the story, and he shouldn't give a fig about that. But what do you think?
Yeah, so should Matsui be concerned? I think my short answer is no. But I think that also comes down to him being quite a unique position within Weekly Shonen Jump as an author, and also, yeah, the volume sales have gone down, volume by volume. It had a good showing in the first one, and it's been a pretty continuous decline from there in a way which is pretty rare to see from a series and not have repercussions like being cancelled. So clearly there's something keeping it alive. And I will say the table of contents also started really high. Its rankings were up there in the magazine. That has also lowered a little bit. It's found a home, I think, in like the middle of the magazine, above Buffer series and the flops that eventually do get cancelled that continue the magazine system. So while it's not thriving at the moment, I think it is surviving, which I think is enough. The anime might change that. It might give them an opportunity to boost the series more, and if it does get more benefits from the adaptation, then yeah, that could keep the series going for as long as he wants. But I think what I've seen happen also is when the adaptation comes out and is done, that is seen as like the peak of the series, and from there sometimes it loses steam and there's less editorial push in the magazine for it. And it is also kind of in a case of if there was a good round of 3 series that got serialized and all of them were proving to be potential hits, then it would put the List of Samurai in a little bit of jeopardy. So I think it may eventually fall out of favor within the magazine after the anime has finished airing. But should he be concerned right now? No, I don't think so. I think he's going to be able to continue at the pace he's going and deliver what he has in mind.
Okay. And I should also say at this point, we don't know how many episodes the anime is going to be, whether it's going to be one core, whether it's going to be two. Uh, if they wanted to do a two-core first season, so to speak, they would have plenty of chapters to do 24, 25 episodes and have plenty left over. That would not be a problem. Whether they actually intend to do that, that's another question. But as you say, the anime certainly isn't going to hurt. My suspicion is it's probably not going to help that much, but it certainly isn't going to hurt.
I was just going to say, when it comes to the anime, I think there's a pretty decent chance that this could improve the sales and give it a nice boost, because one, I think it looks like it's going to be a very solid adaptation based on what we know,
Hmm.
and from what we've seen on the trailers and visuals. For someone like me who's critical of Matsui's art in the manga, I feel like the anime is improving the presentation in a way that will appeal to more people potentially. I just think there is a good chance that that is the route it could go.
I agree with you. I think his visuals, I think, have a chance to work better in anime form for a wider audience than they do in manga form. I think motion and vibrancy, I think, will help in that sense. I have to say, what I've seen in terms of the previews looks really good. I don't expect this to have a monster budget, but what I've seen, it looks very good. Based on who the staff is, it's not a staff you would necessarily expect are going to make major changes thematically or such. But let's not forget that this is the studio that worked on The Promised Neverland, which made some of the most radical and unwise changes to a manga storyline any anime adaptation has ever done. They actually managed to take a manga that jumped the shark in its last couple of arcs and make the manga's shark jump look like Shakespeare back compared to what the anime did. So that was CloverWorks. Now that being said, generally that's not a studio decision per se. That's kind of imposed on them. That decision is imposed on them. It's totally puzzling in that case because that was a really strong selling series. You would think it could have gotten a fairly straightforward adaptation, and I don't know why it didn't. I suspect that the anime adaptation of Nige Jouzu is going to be pretty faithful in terms of plot, and it's just going to stop in the middle, whether that be one core or two. It'll take it up. I think it's going to take it to a certain very significant point, which I think we both know what it is, and then that will be where the anime ends. And I do think it will give the franchise a small boost, but my guess would be probably not enough for it to get a second season, but probably enough to keep the manga going for at least another year or two, assuming that's something that he wants to do. That would be my guess. And at that, let's jump into the spoiler pool here, if you will. And so now at this point, we'll talk about stuff stuff that's happening in recent chapters, etc. So, um, you made a point to me, Samu, that you said basically there's like every 50 chapters, there's a big event. Um, and I think that's less uncommon maybe than you're insinuating it is. But I do agree with you, broadly speaking, that is a thing. There's really two big events here. The first is one of the I think. Would you agree with me, Samu, that after Toshiyuki, the character Tokiyuki, the character with the biggest development is Suwa Yorishige? Would you say he was the most defined character in the series after the protagonist?
Yeah, I think Soa is a pretty vital character in this series.
100%.
Yeah, he's introduced with a very bold personality. Let's say that. I think from the beginning, I kind of got like a Hisoka Gon vibe, like from Hunter x Hunter, with him and Tokiyuki, in a way that was just certain elements to his character traits, which I think are uncomfortable and played for gags, and maybe isn't as successfully done. Actually, it's definitely not as successfully done as Togashi does it, because it's a difficult balance to try and get right. But I think from that initial impression I had of him and throughout the series, I found him mainly quite annoying. If I'm being honest, I didn't like him. Though, I mean, now this is very much spoiler territory, but I will say I didn't know or even think that he was going to die. So when that happened, that was quite shocking, and I do think the series, I do think it was handled as this big emotional moment that, like we've discussed before, even if I have critiques of the series, every like 50 or so chapters, I'm reminded of why I can like it. I'm reminded of the best of it, what it can do. I think of the first chapter, which was an excellent dramatic way to kick off the story and to establish it. Then there's the point where I think a two core anime would end. which we kind of agree on, which would be a big climactic event too. And then the last big one, yeah, the last big one I think would be, actually I remember it's chapter 97. That is when they take back Kamakura, and if anything, that might be the best chapter of the series because it just has such like this emotional payoff that isn't undercut by stupid humor or like goofy Matsui antics. And yeah, that is times like that when I remember, God, the series could be this all the time, but it isn't. And yeah, how Sua's character was handled in his final moments, I think, were the best parts of his character.
Okay, interesting. I mean, he's in a way he's the father figure, if you ask me. I mean, he really is. He is he because the main character's father is gone. He's been brutally murdered along with his brother, which is what happened. Spoiler: that's what happened in real history. This is the guy that sort of steps in as his adoptive father in a sense, and it's very complicated because he also he casts himself as a divine figure, and we're led to believe that it's not bullshit, that in this story that there really are like Shinto divinities who have like live flesh and body roles in the story, and that's effectively what he is. Even though he's a man, he's something more than a man, and his death it was impactful. I didn't really think of him in a sense as the I don't think I never really thought of him in the sense as a Hisoka figure, but that is an interesting take. Some of his mannerisms are out there. Well, what do you think of the new character who sort of stepped into that role, Akiie? He's become kind of in the later chapters. He's a much different personality, but he's effectively become. Now we've had a time skip here. Another spoiler: the main character is now 13 years old, but he's now working with an imperial noble named Akiie, who is in effect stepped into the mentor father role, even though he's much more gruff about it than Suwa was. What do you think of that character and his role in the story?
Aki's character is. It was funny that he got introduced because not long after the surrogate father figure in the series is killed off, we essentially get that dynamic replaced like really quickly. Um, so clearly that was something that Matsui wants to keep within the series with Tokiyuki. And I will say, Aki, well, Soa has highs and lows based on what point in the series they want to measure him by. I think Aki's kind of more in the middle, and he's less annoying, but maybe less impactful. Is kind of where I stand with him at the moment. Though thinking on it, recently he is softening a bit as a character, and I'm liking where his relationship is going with Tokiyuki so far. I am seeing some I'm predicting potential tragedy to come again with his character soon at the point of us recording. So if that happens by the time this episode comes out, then I will not be super shocked. But yeah, maybe whatever happens with him will time up with this 50 or so chapter moment that is likely to come soon.
Yes, we should. We're right about 153, I think, something like that. 155, yeah. All right, so as our resident Shonen Jump maven, how long do you think it's going to go if you had to put a guess on it right now? How long do you think the series is going to go? It is, as you said, based on a real historical person who's got some time left, to spoiler. So how long do you think the series is going to go if you had to guess? Just factoring in his stature as a mangaka, where the sales are now, the fact that there is an anime coming up, the story decisions he's making. If you had to put a number on it, what would you guess?
I feel like the series maybe has 2 more years left for a couple of reasons. I think you can kind of predict based on the year that we're at right now versus with when Tokiyuki dies, and whether I think there's a chance we might get a time skip. That's what I feel. Perhaps after what the next big tragic eventful moment is. I think as well Matsui's previous series have been around 200 chapters. That's been the mark where he gets and he seems to be comfortable with. So I think we're in that sort of range. So maybe 250, that feels about right. And that is also considering the anime is going to be airing for the second half of the year potentially, and the magazine will give it a boost. And yeah, 2 years' time from now, that might be when it loses steam perhaps, and a natural ending feels appropriate.
Hmm. It's funny you throw that number out there because 250 was the exact number that I had in mind. That number just feels right to me. It feels like 250. That just feels like the number. I think he will be allowed to do that. I think he's banked enough credibility with Shonen Jump that I think he's going to be allowed to finish it if that's what he has in mind in terms of a time frame. Um, okay, so this is the point in the program where we talk about similar series that we would recommend if this is something you enjoy. I'll go first on this one. I'm going to recommend Altair, A Record of Battles by Kato Kotono, which our veteran readers, listeners will know was also an anime, but only covered the first uh, couple of arcs. Shokoku no Altair is the Japanese name of that series. It is licensed in English digitally, and it's about a young man who is involved in a conflict. He's a little older than Tokiyuki was when the series starts. He's 14 or 15 or so. This is the conflict in between the Germanic Empire and the Turks. The Austro-Hungarian Empire, I think, is who they basically were, and the Turks. And there's a lot of different. It's a fictionalized version of Central Europe in that time frame, but it's largely based on historical events to the point where there's a Venice arc and such. And other than it being a war story, it's also a story about a young boy who's kind of thrust into a major role in a conflict. Although in the case of Altair, it's because he's a military genius. Although you could say Tokiyuki is in his own way a military genius, but it's a different sort of thing. It's not nearly as comedy driven. It's a little more grave and serious in tone, but there is something of the same sense of visual elegance and fascination with youthful beauty that I think both the mangaka have in common. That I think sort of ties them together. So in addition to the war theme and the young boy hero, I think there's something of that aesthetic overlap too. So that would be my pick. Samu, how about you?
Yeah, before my recommendation, I did want to actually ask on Altair. That isn't a series I've read, but it's always been on my list, and I know it finished recently.
Yeah, yeah, last year.
Still waiting for the official translation to come out of the last volume, I believe. But that's one where I have heard that it's very political. Um,
Yes.
yeah, and when Game of Thrones was airing and people were trying to find similar series, this was definitely a name that I heard thrown out a lot. So yeah, I was wondering, is it an appropriate comparison? Like, is I feel like this might be something that I would like.
I would say it's a better series than the Elusive Samurai on the whole. It's very good. It is quite political, not as political as Game of Thrones, but quite political. It's also not as goofy as Game of Thrones either. And I would also say that the anime does a pretty poor job of capturing the charm of the manga in that case. So for those of you that saw the Altair anime, which I think is good, but not great, and there are certainly sections of adapted manga that are great, don't not give the manga a chance because you didn't think the anime was good enough, because the manga is better.
Well, then, for my recommendation, my pick is Magi, The Labyrinth of Magic by Shinobu Ohtaka. Similar to the series, it does have, I would say, like a reimagined version of history. Elusive Samurai is this Kamakura period Japan mixed in with Matsui's isms that he wants to make it his own take versus probably Arabian Nights is best or most appropriate with Magi. Yeah, they both have child protagonists, both have a band of young friends who are like enchanted who are traveling through this violent world. Both are quite action focused. I would say Magi is a more traditional battle series in that sense, and there's also a charm and a humor to it that is not too different from Elusive Samurai and how baked in it is to the presentation. But for me, it basically ticks all those similar boxes and does it more successfully.
Well, I've seen the anime. I have not read the manga. I thought the anime was kind of okay. What I remember about the anime mainly is certain chunks of it I thought were really good, and then certain chunks of it were, to me, just completely disinterested. So I remember a lot of ups and downs, inconsistency. That's what stands out to me in thinking back on the anime version of that. Cool. And then last, we talk about our personal rankings for the series. And I'm going to let you jump in first on this one. Semu, what is your ranking out of 100 for the Elusive Samurai?
Okay, my final rating then is going to be a 67.
Ooh.
Like I mentioned, there are parts of the series that I'm quite critical on, and I don't know if I will ever enjoy. I feel like there is a ceiling of my enjoyment that I can get from the series. But then again, there are these big, impactful events that happen periodically that, if those come more in place of Matsui's goofiness and his sense of humor, modern references, and meta aspects, if that if that gets more focused, it could end up being a higher rating by the time the series is over. But that is where I stand right now because there's just too many things that aren't to my taste.
Okay. And my score on this one may be a little generous, but I'm going to give it an 80. And I think it's because there are certain series that I look at and I can say I like this series more than I can objectively justify using logic. And if I break down all the parts, the sum would be less than 80. But when you put it all together, somehow I like it, the total package, more. I think the whole is more than the sum of the parts with the Elusive Samurai. I think there is something special about it, and uh, I'll take the inconsistencies. I'll take the misses because I think that it has a certain spark of genius to it, even if we don't see as much of it as I wish we did. So my score is an 80. And that is our My Taste is Better Than Yours look at the Elusive Samurai by Yuusei Matsui. And it is, in fact, running in Weekly Shonen Jump. By the time this airs, the anime may have premiered, but the anime will be premiering in July from CloverWorks, and I'm hoping it'll be two cores because I think that would be a good representation of what the manga has to offer. And it's been a very interesting discussion of a series that's not one either of us loves. It's not one that either of us would call our favorite, but one that I think has a lot of interesting elements to it. So I'm happy we got the opportunity to discuss it. Samu, thanks very much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks as always for having this discussion. And yeah, I'm even more excited for our next episode where we're going to continue Weekly Shonen Jump and this time focus on a series that is one of my favorites in the magazine.
Okay, thanks a lot, guys. We'll talk to you soon. Stay frosty.